Welcome to the Royal Army Museum here in Brussels. We're standing here in the exhibition hall of the Great War, the First World War, and among the many cannons and mortars of different shapes and sizes, there is one particular example that really stands out due to its rather weird appearance. I'm talking about this device right here. It is, in fact, a grenade launching device that was officially adopted by the French. This adoption was probably rather late in the war, because in the French infantry manuals of 1916 there is no mention of it, while in 1918 the manuals do speak of this as official French material. The name Bombarde DR actually doesn't stand for the inventors of this device, but it actually stands for the two guys that were responsible for developing this grenade here, the Grenade à Fusil Model 1916. And these guys were named, two French army officers that were named Drian et Renoir, hence the name DR. The context for this device is the stalemate in trench warfare of World War I and the need to have weapons that could fire in high angles. Many different ways to do this were invented, some more efficient than others, but one of the more efficient ways was the development of rifle grenades. In 1916, the introduction of the WW1 rifle grenades were a great tool in the hands of the French army, but less known is the fact that other rifle grenades were also used by France. More specifically, two French army officials named Drian et Renoir developed the Grenade à Fusil Model of 1916. This grenade weighs around 550 grams and had an explosive charge of 85 grams of shadid. It was specifically developed to be used using the fusil de gras, the Gras rifles that were still available in the tens of thousands, but horribly outdated by 1916. Converting these antiquated single-shot rifles into grenade-throwing devices was thus a logical solution in this context. And there seem to be two different ways that the French army envisioned developing, converting Gras rifles for launching this model of grenade. The first way was installing a launching cup directly at the end of the barrel of the individual rifles. They were thus propelled using a blank 8mm cartridge with a single pull of the trigger, launching a single grenade. But World War I wouldn't be World War I, and France would definitely not be France if they didn't develop and design some absurd-looking device that could launch projectiles a bit faster or further. So what did the French do? They took 4 barrels of the Gras rifles and they basically sawed off a big part of the barrels. They kept the action, of course, the bolt action, the receiver, and they closed off the holes of the barrel hermetically with this hexagonal nut. And they installed these barrels on basically a steel metal framework, triangle in shape. They cut 2 holes in each barrel and soldered into these holes small cups, which served as the grenade launching pads basically. In this way, you had a fixed 45 degrees angle, and so it seems a very rigid, unflexible system. The French manuals were very strict about this, that with the actions clear, the grenades were simply shoved on top of the cups. This part was hollow, this sheet metal part was hollow, and it was winged for aerodynamical purposes. But this was just simply a sleeve to be put on top of the individual cups. For example, here, you can easily insert it on top of the cups. Once you've done this, the following step could be done, which was inserting an 8mm blank Libel cartridge without projectile, but with a different filling, 3 grams of ballistite, which was a bit more aggressive explosive combustion. Then the action was closed, and of course you can see that action is not complete. And then they had a rope on each trigger, so 4 ropes that could be pulled at the time the section officer gave the order to fire, that the actions had to be opened and clear before you inserted the grenades on top of the cups. This for obvious reasons. You don't want your friend Louis stumbling over a rope while you're inserting the grenades. On top of this, they also drilled that the fuses of the grenades were only to be installed at the very last moment. So you might ask, what's the range of this device? Because also, in contrast to, for example, the German Granatenwerfer, which had a very flexible way of aiming the spigot, this was a very rigid system. You can see that they are all placed roughly 45 degrees. So you would say that for aiming this is not ideal, but the French actually had quite a clever system, and that's where these little holes come into play in combination with this device, which is basically just like a twisted steel wire. And the goal of this wire was to set up your distance, because each hole corresponds with a certain distance. For example, here you have your fourth hole, which makes the grenade seat up to this point, which gives a fixed expansion in the cup of gases. More or less expansion means more or less range, and the deeper you will seat your grenade, so the very last hole corresponds with a range of around 370 meters, and the first one would correspond with only around 40 meters. So you have quite a flexible system. Every hole adds around 40-meter distance of range. In theory, you could launch all 8 grenades a different distance to cover, for example, the whole movement of an enemy infiltration squad. It's unsure how effective they were in practice or how well liked they were by the soldiers operating them, nor is it known how many were actually made. For sure is that there were not many examples made. Production was probably very small scale, because the example in the Royal Military Museum, probably there were other grenade launching devices in use that were a lot more effective, like the Vivien Bessières rifle cups. It is one of the only examples actually known. The few other pictures that you can find on the internet, you can see that most examples are incomplete. The name Bombarde DR, and even though it looks like it was made in somebody's garage, which makes